The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty ranch as Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow. His weathered hands gripped the fence post he was mending, the same hands that had worked this land for over 20 years. The year was 1887, and life on the frontier was never easy, but Sam had built something meaningful here in the shadow of the Red Rock Mountains. His ranch wasn't the biggest in the territory, but it was honest work. He raised cattle and horses, traded fairly with the nearby town of Cedar Ridge, and kept to himself mostly. The Apache Wars had ended just a year ago with Geronimo's surrender, but tensions still ran high between the white settlers and the native tribes. Most ranchers in the area viewed any Apache with suspicion and fear, but Sam had always believed in judging a man by his actions, not his blood. That particular afternoon, as the heat shimmered off the desert floor, Sam noticed a figure stumbling toward his property line. At first, he thought it might be a drunk cowhand from one of the neighboring spreads, but as the figure drew closer, Sam could see it was a young Apache man, barely more than a boy really, dressed in tattered clothes and moving with the unsteady gait of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Sam set down his tools and walked toward the fence line, his hand instinctively resting near the pistol at his hip. Not out of fear, but out of caution learned from years on the frontier. As he got closer, he could see the young man's condition was even worse than he'd first thought. His dark skin was pale and clammy, his lips cracked from dehydration, and there were angry red welts on his arms that looked like rope burns. The Apache youth collapsed just as Sam reached him, falling heavily to the ground near the wooden fence that marked the boundary of Sam's property. Up close, Sam could see he was probably no more than 17 or 18 years old, with the lean build of someone who'd been living rough for quite some time. His black hair was matted with dust and sweat, and his clothes were little more than rags. Sam knelt beside the unconscious young man, checking for signs of serious injury. Apart from dehydration and obvious malnutrition, he seemed to be breathing steadily. The rope burns on his arms told a story Sam didn't like to imagine. In those days, it wasn't uncommon for Apache people to be captured and sold into forced labor, despite it being illegal. Many ranchers and mining operations turn a blind eye to such practices, especially in the remote territories where law enforcement was sparse. Without hesitation, Sam scooped the slight figure into his arms and carried him toward the ranch house. The young man was lighter than he should have been, confirming Sam's suspicions about his malnourished state. As he walked, Sam couldn't help but think about his own son, Johnny, who had died of fever 3 years earlier at the age of 16. There was something about this Apache boy that reminded him of Johnny. Perhaps it was just his youth and vulnerability. Sam's ranch house was a modest adobe structure with thick walls that kept it cool during the blazing desert days and warm during the cold mountain nights. He had built it himself when he first claimed this land, designing it with both comfort and defense in mind. The front room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace that had seen him through many lonely winters since his wife Martha had passed away from consumption 5 years ago. He laid the unconscious young man on the wooden bed in the spare room, the same room where Johnny used to sleep when he visited during school breaks. Sam fetched clean water from the well and a basin from the kitchen, then carefully began cleaning the dirt and grime from the boy's face and arms. As he worked, he noticed the intricate beadwork on what remained of the young man's shirt, suggesting he came from a family of some standing within his tribe. The rope burns were worse than they had initially appeared. The skin was raw and infected in several places, clearly the result of being bound for an extended period. Sam's jaw tightened with anger at whoever had done this to a mere boy. He had served briefly as a deputy sheriff in his younger days and had seen his share of cruelty, but something about this situation struck him as particularly heinous. After cleaning and bandaging the wounds as best he could, Sam prepared a thin broth from beef bones and vegetables. He had learned from an old army doctor that someone in this condition needed to be fed carefully with small amounts of easily digestible food at first. Too much too quickly could actually be dangerous for someone who had been starving. As evening approached, the young Apache began to stir. His dark eyes opened slowly, filled with confusion and fear as he took in his surroundings. Sam was sitting in a chair beside the bed, reading his worn copy of the Bible by lamplight. When he noticed his guest was awake, he set the book aside and leaned forward. "Easy there, son," Sam said in a gentle voice. You're safe now. You're on my ranch, and nobody's going to hurt you here. The young man's eyes darted around the room, clearly expecting danger. He tried to sit up quickly, but weakness overcame him, and he fell back against the pillow with a soft groan. Sam could see the internal struggle playing out on the boy's face, the instinct to flee warring with his body's inability to do so. What do you want?" the Apache youth asked in heavily accented English, his voice barely above a whisper. The fact that he spoke English at all suggested he had some contact with white society, probably through one of the government schools or missions that had been established in recent years. "I don't want anything from you," Sam replied honestly. "I found you collapsed near my fence, half dead from hunger and thirst. I brought you inside to help you recover. That's all." The young man's eyes narrowed with suspicion. White men do not help Apache without reason. "What is your price?" Sam could understand the suspicion. Relations between the Apache and white settlers have been marked by violence, betrayal, and broken promises for decades. Trust was a rare commodity in this part of the world, especially across racial lines. "No price," Sam said firmly. "I believe in helping people when they need it, regardless of who they are or where they come from. My name is Samuel Morrison, but most folks just call me Sam. This is my ranch, and you're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel." The young Apache studied Sam's face for a long moment, as if trying to read his true intentions. "I'm called Joseph," he said finally. "Joseph Standing Bear. That is the name the mission school gave me. My Apache name is—" He paused, seeming to decide whether to trust this white rancher with his true identity. "My Apache name is Nailnish. Sam nodded respectfully. "Joseph it is then, if that's what you prefer. Are you hungry? I have some broth that should be easy on your stomach." Joseph's stomach answered for him with a loud rumble that made him flush with embarrassment. Despite his obvious need, he hesitated before nodding slightly. Sam rose and fetched a bowl of warm broth from the kitchen, along with a wooden spoon. He helped Joseph sit up against the pillows and handed him the bowl. "Slowly now," Sam cautioned. "I know you're hungry, but your stomach needs to get used to food again gradually." Joseph took a tentative sip of the broth, then another. The warm liquid seemed to give him strength, and Sam could see some color returning to his pale features. As he ate, Sam noticed him glancing around the room, taking in the simple furnishings, the cross on the wall, and the family photograph on the bedside table showing Sam with a woman and young boy. "Your family?" Joseph asked, indicating the photograph. Sam's expression grew sad. "My wife Martha and son Johnny. They both passed away some years back. It's just me now." Joseph lowered the spoon, studying Sam with new eyes. Perhaps he recognized something familiar in the older man's loss, or perhaps he was simply surprised by Sam's openness about his grief. In Apache culture, family was everything, and losing one's spouse and child was a tragedy that transcended cultural boundaries. "I am sorry for your loss," Joseph said quietly, and Sam could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "Thank you. That means something coming from you." Sam paused, then asked gently, "What happened to you, Joseph? How did you come to be in such a condition?" Joseph's hand unconsciously moved to the rope burns on his arm, and his expression darkened. "I was taken from my camp 3 weeks ago by men who said they had work for young Apache. They promised good wages and fair treatment." His voice grew bitter. "There was no work, only forced labor in the copper mines near Tucson. We were kept chained, worked from dawn to dusk, given little food or water." Sam's hands clenched into fists. He had heard rumors of such operations, but had hoped they were exaggerated. "How did you escape?" "There was a cave-in," Joseph continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "In the confusion, I managed to slip my bonds and run. I have been walking for 4 days, hiding during the day, traveling at night. I was trying to reach my people's camp in the Dragoon Mountains, but I became lost and weak. The Dragoon Mountains were at least 50 miles to the southeast, rough country even for someone in good health and familiar with the terrain. For a weakened, malnourished young man traveling on foot while avoiding detection, it might as well have been 500 miles. "Well, you're safe now," Sam said firmly. "You can stay here as long as you need to recover your strength. When you're ready, I'll help you get back to your people." Joseph looked startled by this offer. "You would do this?" "Even though I am Apache." "Especially because you're Apache," Sam replied. "What happened to you is wrong, and I won't turn my back on someone who needs help just because we come from different peoples." They sat in comfortable silence for a while as Joseph finished the broth. Outside, the desert night was settling in with its familiar sounds. The distant call of a coyote, the rustle of night creatures moving through the scrub brush, and the gentle lowing of Sam's cattle in their pen near the barn. As the days passed, Joseph's strength gradually returned under Sam's careful care. The rancher proved to be as good as his word, asking nothing in return for his hospitality. He shared his meals, provided clean clothes, and tended to Joseph's healing wounds with the skill of someone who had dealt with a share of injuries over the years. At first, Joseph remained guarded and suspicious, but as Sam's actions consistently matched his words, the young Apache began to relax. He started helping with small chores around the ranch as his strength returned, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, and helping to repair equipment in the barn. Sam was impressed by Joseph's knowledge and skills. Despite his youth, he had an intuitive understanding of horses that amazed the experienced rancher. He could calm a spooked mare with a few whispered words and gentle touches, and he seemed to know instinctively when an animal was sick or injured. "Where did you learn so much about horses?" Sam asked one morning as they worked together to break a young stallion that had been giving Sam trouble for weeks. Joseph's expression grew distant. "My grandfather was a great horseman among our people. He taught me the old ways of understanding the horse's spirit. He said that horses and Apache have always been partners, not master and servant." The way Joseph spoke of his grandfather suggested the old man held a position of great respect within the tribe. Sam filed this information away, sensing there was more to Joseph's story than the young man had revealed. On the 10th day of Joseph's recovery, something happened that would change both their lives forever. Sam was working in the corral with a particularly stubborn horse when he heard Joseph call out from where he was mending his saddle in the barn. "Sam, there are riders coming." Many riders. Sam looked up to see dust clouds approaching from the east, too much dust for a casual visitor or even a small group of cowboys. His first thought was that it might be the men who had enslaved Joseph, come to reclaim their property. He quickly counted at least 20 horses in the approaching group. "Joseph," he called urgently, "you'd better get inside and stay out of sight until we see what this is about." But Joseph was already walking toward the house, his face set with grim determination. "No, Sam, I will not hide. If they have come for me, I will face them standing." As the riders drew closer, Sam could see they were Apache warriors, their horses painted for war, and their faces stern with purpose. At their head rode a man whose bearing and decorations marked him as someone of great importance. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver streaking his black hair and scars that spoke of many battles. His eyes were the same dark brown as Joseph's, but they held a depth of wisdom and authority that made Sam instinctively straighten his shoulders. The war party stopped just outside Sam's property line, their horses snorting and stamping with barely contained energy. The leader raised his hand, and the entire group fell silent with military precision. His gaze moved from Sam to Joseph, and Sam saw the young man's face transform with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "Grandfather," Joseph said quietly, but in the desert silence, his voice carried clearly to where Sam stood. The Apache leader's stern expression softened slightly as he looked at his grandson, taking in Joseph's improved appearance and obvious good health. Then his piercing gaze turned to Sam, and the rancher felt as though he were being measured and weighed by eyes that had seen too much history and too much pain. Sam stood his ground, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons. He had no illusions about his chances if this encounter went badly. 20 Apache warriors could overrun his ranch in minutes if they chose to. But something in the leader's bearing suggested this was not a war party bent on destruction, but rather a rescue mission that had found its objective already safe. The Apache chief spoke in his native language to Joseph, who responded respectfully, but firmly. Sam couldn't understand the words, but he could read the emotions in their voices. There was relief, concern, and what sounded like Joseph explaining his situation and defending Sam's actions. After several minutes of conversation, the chief turned his attention back to Sam. When he spoke, it was in heavily accented but clear English. "You are the man who helped my grandson?" Sam nodded. "I am. I found him near death and brought him into my home to recover. He's been no trouble at all." The chief studied Sam for a long moment. "I am Nate, war chief of the Chiricahua Apache. The young man you helped is not just my grandson. He is the son of my eldest daughter, and destined to be a leader among our people. You have done more than save one life, Samuel Morrison. You have preserved the future of our tribe." The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. Joseph wasn't just any Apache youth, but the grandson of one of the most respected war chiefs in the Southwest, a man whose name was known throughout the territory. Nate had been one of the last to surrender with Geronimo, and his reputation as both a warrior and a wise leader was legendary even among white settlers. "I didn't know," Sam said honestly, "but it wouldn't have mattered if I had. The boy needed help, and I gave it. That's what decent people do for one another." Nature's expression remained unreadable, but Sam thought he detected a glimmer of something that might have been respect in the chief's dark eyes. The other warriors remained motionless on their horses, waiting for their leader's decision about how this encounter would proceed. Joseph stepped forward and spoke again in Apache, this time at greater length. Sam caught his own name several times and could tell the young man was giving a detailed account of his treatment at the ranch. When he finished, Nate asked him several specific questions, which Joseph answered with what sounded like complete honesty. Finally, Nate nodded and turned back to Sam. "My grandson tells me you asked for nothing in return for your help, that you treated him as you would your own son, that you offered to help him return to our people when he was strong enough to travel." "That's right," Sam confirmed. "I did what anyone should do in such circumstances." "But not what anyone would do," Nate corrected him. "In these times, few white men would risk helping an Apache, especially one found in such condition. Most would assume he was a runaway criminal or worse." The truth of this statement hung in the air between them. Relations between Apache and whites were still fragile, and helping an Apache could bring unwanted attention from territorial authorities or hostile neighbors. Sam had known the risks, but had chosen to help anyway. Nate dismounted from his horse with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He walked slowly towards Sam, and the rancher forced himself to remain still as the Apache chief approached. When they were standing face to face, Nate extended his hand in the white man's custom of greeting. "You have shown honor and kindness to my family, Samuel Morrison. This creates a debt that must be acknowledged." Sam shook the offered hand firmly. "No debt necessary, Chief. I'm just glad I could help." "But," Nate shook his head, "among my people, such actions create bonds that cannot be ignored. You have earned the friendship and protection of the Chiricahua Apache. This is not given lightly or forgotten easily." The weight of these words was not lost on Sam. Apache friendship was indeed a rare and valuable thing, especially in these uncertain times when the future of both peoples in this land remained unclear. But beyond the practical implications, Sam found himself genuinely moved by the dignity and grace with which Nate was handling the situation. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert, Sam invited the chief and his warriors to make camp on his land for the night. Nate accepted graciously, and soon the Apache had established a temporary camp near Sam's corral, their horses grazing alongside his cattle and in sight that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. That evening, as they shared a meal around Sam's fire, Joseph translated conversations between his grandfather and the rancher. Sam learned about Apache customs and traditions, while Nate heard about life on a frontier ranch and the challenges facing small landowners in the changing West. It was during this conversation that Sam began to understand the true significance of what had happened. Joseph was not just Nate's grandson, but was being groomed to be a bridge between the Apache people and the white world that was rapidly encroaching on their traditional way of life. His time at the mission school, his knowledge of English, and his understanding of both cultures made him invaluable to his people's future survival. The men who had enslaved him had not just been committing a crime against one individual, but had been striking at the heart of the Apache people's hopes for adaptation and survival in a changing world. By helping Joseph, Sam had unknowingly played a crucial role in preserving not just one life, but the potential future of an entire people. As the fire burned low and the desert night settled around them, Sam realized that his simple act of human kindness had set in motion events that would ripple far beyond his small ranch. He had gained not just a friend in Joseph, but an ally in Nate whose influence extended throughout the Apache nations of the Southwest. But he had no way of knowing that this was only the beginning of a story that would test the bonds of friendship across cultural boundaries and ultimately change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The morning after Nate and his warriors departed, taking Joseph with them back to their mountain stronghold, Sam found himself alone once again on his ranch. But the silence felt different now, charged with the memory of the extraordinary encounter that had just concluded. As he went about his daily chores, feeding the livestock and checking the water troughs, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had fundamentally changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks passed in relative normalcy. Sam worked his land, tended his animals, and made his weekly trip to Cedar Ridge for supplies. He told no one about his Apache visitors, partly because he doubted anyone would believe him, and partly because he sensed that discretion was important. The relationship between the territorial government and the Apache tribes remained delicate, and word of a white rancher entertaining a war chief and his warriors might cause complications for everyone involved. It was during his 4th weekly trip to town that Sam first noticed the changes in how people treated him. Cedar Ridge was a small frontier community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers were noticed immediately. Sam had been trading there for years and knew most of the merchants and regular customers by name. But on this particular day, there seemed to be more Apache people in town than usual. They moved through the streets with quiet dignity, conducting business at the trading post and general store. What struck Sam as unusual was the respectful way they nodded to him when their paths crossed, and the almost protective stance they took when some of the local cowboys made disparaging comments about too many Indians in town. At the general store, old Pete Henderson, the proprietor, pulled Sam aside with a puzzled expression on his weathered face. Pete had been running the store for 15 years and prided himself on understanding the complex social dynamics of frontier life. "Sam, I gotta ask you something, and I hope you won't take offense," Pete said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "The Apache folks who've been coming through lately, they all seem to know who you are. When I mention your name, they get this respectful look like you're somebody important. You've been doing business with the tribes." Sam considered his answer carefully. "I had occasion to help one of their young people who was in trouble. Word gets around, I suppose." Pete's eyes widened slightly. "Must have been some help you gave. The way they talk about you, you'd think you saved somebody's life." "Maybe I did," Sam replied simply, loading his supplies into his wagon. "Isn't that what neighbors are supposed to do for each other?" As Sam prepared to leave town, he was approached by a well-dressed man he didn't recognize. The stranger wore a black suit despite the heat, and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His pale skin and soft hands marked him as someone who spent more time behind a desk than under the desert sun. "Excuse me, are you Samuel Morrison?" the man asked in a clipped Eastern accent. "I am. Who's asking?" "My name is Harrison Webb. I'm an agent with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, recently assigned to this territory. I'd like to speak with you about some matters concerning the local Apache population." Sam's instincts immediately went on alert. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was not known for its friendly visits to ranchers, and their involvement usually meant trouble for someone. "What kind of matters?" Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private? I'm staying at the hotel. Could you meet me there this evening? I'm a busy man, Mr. Webb. If you have something to say to me, you can say it here." Webb glanced around at the other people in the vicinity, then leaned closer. "It's come to our attention that you may have had recent contact with certain Apache leaders. Given the sensitive nature of federal-tribal relations, we need to ensure that any such contact is properly documented and approved through official channels." Sam felt a chill run down his spine. Somehow, word of Nature's visit had reached federal authorities. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Morrison, we have reliable reports that Chief Nate himself visited your ranch 3 weeks ago with a sizable war party. Now, I'm sure this was an innocent encounter, but federal law requires that any meetings between citizens and tribal leaders be reported to the appropriate authorities." The threat was clear, though politely delivered. Sam kept his expression neutral while his mind raced through the implications. If the government decided he had engaged in unauthorized negotiations with the Apache, he could face serious legal consequences. His ranch could be confiscated, and he could be charged with violating federal Indian policy. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Sam said carefully. "I run a cattle ranch, not a diplomatic mission. If Apache people have been seen in the area, it's probably because they're traveling to the trading post here in town." Webb's smile grew colder. "I hope that's all it is, Mr. Morrison. But I'll be staying in the area for several weeks, conducting interviews and gathering information. I do hope you'll be available if I need to speak with you again." The agent tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Sam with an uneasy feeling in his stomach. As he drove his wagon home, he couldn't shake the sense that dark clouds were gathering on his horizon. That evening, as Sam sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the mountains red and gold, he noticed movement in the distance. A single rider was approaching from the direction of the Apache strongholds, moving at the steady pace of someone on a long journey. As the figure drew closer, Sam recognized the lean build and distinctive riding style of Joseph Standing Bear. The young Apache had filled out considerably during his month back with his people. His face had lost the gaunt, haunted look of his captivity, and he carried himself with new confidence. He was dressed in a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and practical Western gear, the combination marking him as someone who moved comfortably between two worlds. "Sam," Joseph called out as he approached. "It is good to see you again, my friend." Sam stood and walked out to meet him, genuinely pleased to see the young man looking so healthy and strong. "Joseph, you look like your people have been taking good care of you. How are you feeling?" "Strong again, thanks to your kindness," Joseph replied, dismounting and grasping Sam's hand in the Apache style of greeting he had taught the rancher. "But I did not come just for a social visit. I bring word from my grandfather." Joseph's expression grew serious as he continued. "There are men asking questions in the tribal camps. Government men. They want to know about Apache movements, about our leaders, about any contact we have had with white ranchers in the area." Sam's heart sank. "A man named Harrison Webb came to see me in town today. He knows about your grandfather's visit." Joseph nodded grimly. "We feared as much. My grandfather sent me to warn you and to offer our assistance. The government men are not just gathering information. They are looking for reasons to break the peace agreement and force our people onto the reservation in Florida." The implications hit Sam like a punch to the gut. The federal government had been looking for excuses to relocate the remaining free Apache tribes for years. If they could manufacture evidence of unauthorized meetings or secret alliances between Apache leaders and white settlers, they could claim the tribes were planning renewed hostilities. "What kind of assistance?" Sam asked. Joseph glanced around carefully, then spoke in a lower voice. "My grandfather has many friends among the Apache scouts who work for the Army. They hear things, learn of plans before they are put into action. He can provide you with advance warning if the government decides to move against you." "And what does he want in return?" "Nothing that you have not already given," Joseph replied. "He asks only that you continue to be a friend to our people. There may come times when that friendship is tested, when helping us might bring danger to yourself." Sam considered this carefully. Accepting Nature's offer would essentially make him part of an Apache intelligence network, something that could be considered treason if discovered by federal authorities. On the other hand, he was apparently already under suspicion, and having advance warning of government plans might be the only thing that saved him from false charges. "Tell your grandfather I'm honored by his trust," Sam said finally. "I'll do whatever I can to help, within reason." Joseph smiled for the first time since his arrival. He said he would give that answer. He also said to tell you that Apache friendship comes with obligations on both sides. We do not abandon our friends in times of trouble. Over the next several hours, Joseph filled Sam in on the complex political situation developing throughout the Southwest. The federal government was under pressure from mining companies and cattle ranchers who wanted access to the remaining Apache lands. At the same time, there was growing sentiment in Washington that the Indian problem needed to be solved once and for all through forced relocation. Nate and the other Apache leaders were walking a delicate tightrope, trying to maintain their people's freedom while avoiding any actions that could be construed as hostile. They had been scrupulously careful to honor the terms of the peace agreement, but they feared it wouldn't be enough to prevent eventual forced removal. "The government men are particularly interested in any contact between our leaders and white civilians," Joseph explained. "They claim that such meetings could be used to plan attacks or coordinate resistance. It is a convenient excuse to justify whatever actions they want to take." As they talked, Sam began to understand the true scope of what he had become involved in. His simple act of helping a starving young man had inadvertently made him a player in a much larger drama involving the fate of an entire people. The weight of this responsibility was both humbling and terrifying. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Sam was awakened before dawn by the sound of approaching horses, not the single rider he had grown accustomed to, but multiple horses moving at speed. His first thought was that Webb had returned with federal marshals, but as he peered out his window, he saw something far more ominous. A group of men in civilian clothes was approaching his ranch, but their military bearing and coordinated movement marked them as more than simple visitors. At their head rode a man Sam recognized with a sinking heart, Jake Carson, a notorious bounty hunter and Indian fighter who was rumored to work for various government agencies when the pay was right. Carson was a hard man who had made his reputation during the worst years of the Apache Wars, when the Army paid bounties for Apache scalps and asked few questions about how they were obtained. He was exactly the kind of person the government might use for work they didn't want traced back to official channels. Sam quickly woke Joseph, who had spent the night in the spare room. "We have trouble coming. You need to get out of here fast." Joseph moved to the window and assessed the situation with the quick eye of someone trained in warfare. There are 8 of them, well armed and positioned to surround the house. They know their business. "Can you make it to your horse?" Joseph shook his head. "They have someone watching the corral. Besides, running now would only confirm whatever suspicions they have about you." Sam realized Joseph was right. If he were found harboring an Apache fugitive, it would give Webb all the evidence he needed to destroy Sam's life. But if Joseph were discovered hiding in his house, the consequences would be even worse. "Hide in the root cellar," Sam said quickly. "There's a concealed entrance under the kitchen floorboards. Stay there until they leave." As Joseph disappeared into the hidden cellar, Sam forced himself to go about his normal morning routine. He made coffee, stepped onto his porch, and began his daily inspection of the property, acting as if he had no idea that armed men were positioned around his ranch. Carson and his men approached openly once they saw Sam was awake and moving about. The bounty hunter was a tall, lean man with cold gray eyes and a face marked by years of harsh living. He wore his guns low on his hips in the manner of someone who used them frequently and efficiently. "Morrison," Carson called out as he rode up to the house. "We need to have a talk." "About what?" Sam replied, trying to keep his voice steady and casual. "About the Apache boy you've been hiding. We have reliable information that Joseph Standing Bear is on your property, and we have a warrant for his arrest." Sam's heart raced, but he kept his expression puzzled. "I don't know anyone by that name. What's he wanted for?" Carson reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "Escaped prisoner. He was being held for questioning in connection with several thefts from mining operations near Tucson. Broke out of custody and disappeared. We tracked him to this area." Sam took the warrant and examined it carefully. It looked official enough with the proper seals and signatures, but something about it felt wrong. The charges were vague, and the language was more typical of a military order than a civilian warrant. "Like I said, I don't know anyone by that name," Sam repeated. "But you're welcome to look around if you think it will help." Carson's eyes narrowed. "That's mighty accommodating of you, Morrison. Most folks get upset when lawmen want to search their property." "I've got nothing to hide," Sam said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. "Help yourself." The search was thorough and professional. Carson's men went through every building on the ranch, checking the barn, the corral, and even the chicken coop. They found Joseph's horse, which Sam claimed he had purchased from Apache traders several weeks earlier. The animal's distinctive markings made this explanation somewhat suspect, but Carson had no way to prove otherwise. When they failed to find any trace of Joseph himself, Carson became increasingly frustrated and suspicious. He questioned Sam repeatedly about any contact he might have had with Apache people, but Sam stuck to his story about occasional trading relationships and denied any knowledge of specific individuals. After 2 hours of searching, Carson was forced to admit defeat. But as he prepared to leave, he issued a clear threat. "I don't know what game you're playing, Morrison, but this isn't over. If we find out you've been harboring fugitives or interfering with federal operations, you'll find yourself in more trouble than you can handle." "You understand," Sam replied evenly. "I hope you find whoever you're looking for." After Carson and his men rode away, Sam waited a full hour before retrieving Joseph from the root cellar. The young Apache emerged pale and shaken, having heard every word of the conversation through the thin floorboards. "They will be back," Joseph said grimly, "and next time they will be more careful in their search." Sam nodded. "You can't stay here anymore. It's too dangerous for both of us." But Joseph shook his head. "Running away will not solve the problem. Carson is not acting alone. Someone with real authority wants me captured, and they will not stop until they succeed." As they discussed their options, Sam began to realize that the situation was even more serious than he had initially thought. Joseph wasn't just any Apache youth who had been wrongly imprisoned. His status as Nature's grandson made him a valuable political prisoner, someone who could be used as leverage against the Apache leadership. "We need to get word to your grandfather," Sam said finally. "He needs to know what's happening." Joseph agreed, but pointed out the obvious problem. Any message we send could be intercepted, and any Apache who comes here will be walking into a trap. Carson will have men watching this place from now on. They spent the rest of the day working out a plan that would allow Joseph to safely return to his people while protecting Sam from further suspicion. It would require careful timing, considerable risk, and a good deal of luck. But as evening approached, they both knew it was their only chance. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Sam found himself reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short months. He had gone from being a simple rancher trying to make an honest living to being caught in the middle of a complex political struggle that could affect the fate of an entire people. The bonds of friendship he had formed with Joseph and nature had brought richness and meaning to his previously solitary existence, but they had also brought danger and uncertainty. As he prepared for what might be the most challenging night of his life, Sam realized that despite the risks, he wouldn't change anything he had done. Sometimes he thought doing the right thing meant accepting consequences you never anticipated. And sometimes the most important moments in a man's life came not from the choices he made deliberately, but from the simple human instinct to help someone in need. The night ahead would test that philosophy in ways Sam could never have imagined. The plan they devised was born of desperation and ingenuity in equal measure. Joseph would leave the ranch at midnight, traveling on foot to avoid the sound of hoofbeats that might alert Carson's watchers. Sam would provide a distraction by taking his wagon into town the next morning, ostensibly for supplies, but actually to draw attention away from the ranch and give Joseph time to reach Apache territory. As darkness fell over the desert, Sam and Joseph made their final preparations. The young Apache changed into dark clothing that would help him blend with the shadows, and Sam provided him with food and water for the journey. They both knew the risks were enormous. If Joseph were captured, he would likely disappear into the federal prison system, never to be seen again. If Sam were caught helping him escape, he could face charges of harboring a fugitive and interfering with federal operations. "My grandfather will remember what you have done," Joseph said as they prepared to part. "Apache memory is long, and our debts are always paid." Sam clasped the young man's hand firmly. "Just get home safe. That's payment enough for me." At precisely midnight, Joseph slipped out of the ranch house and vanished into the darkness with the silent grace that was the hallmark of Apache warriors. Sam watched from his window until even his keen eyes could no longer detect any trace of movement, then settled in to wait for dawn. The next morning, Sam hitched up his wagon and made his journey to Cedar Ridge as planned. He moved at a deliberately slow pace, stopping frequently to check his load and adjust the harness. To any watchers, it would appear that he was simply an old rancher taking his time on a routine supply run. In town, Sam made a show of conducting normal business, purchasing flour and coffee at the general store and stopping by the blacksmith to discuss repairs to his plow. He lingered over each transaction, drawing out conversations and making himself visible to as many people as possible. It was at the blacksmith shop that Sam learned his plan had worked, but perhaps too well. Tom Bradley, the smithy, was a man who heard every piece of gossip in a 50-mile radius, and he had disturbing news to share. "Sam, you hear about the trouble last night?" Tom asked as he examined Sam's plow blade. "Carson and his boys came tearing through here around dawn, all lathered up about something. Word is they were chasing some Apache who broke cover near the old mining road." Sam's blood ran cold. "They catch him?" "Don't rightly know. They headed off toward the Dragoons with a whole mess of riders, including some Army boys from Fort Bowie. Haven't seen hide nor hair of them since." Sam forced himself to remain calm while his mind raced through the implications. If Joseph had been spotted and was being pursued, he might be leading his hunters directly toward his grandfather's stronghold. The presence of Army troops suggested this was more than a simple manhunt for an escaped prisoner. "Probably just some young buck trying to steal horses," Sam said with feigned disinterest. "Happens all the time out here." But Tom shook his head. Don't think so. Carson was asking specific questions about that standing bear fellow again. Seems mighty determined to catch that particular Indian. Sam finished his business in town and headed home with a growing sense of dread. If Joseph had been captured, it would only be a matter of time before Carson came for Sam again, this time with more serious charges. And if Joseph had escaped but led his pursuers toward Nature's camp, it could spark the very conflict that everyone had been trying to avoid. As Sam approached his ranch in the late afternoon, he could see that his worst fears were beginning to materialize. A column of dust on the horizon marked the approach of a large group of riders, too many to be Carson's original party. As they drew closer, Sam could make out the blue uniforms of cavalry troopers mixed with the civilian clothes of bounty hunters and federal agents. At the head of the column rode a man Sam recognized from newspaper photographs, Colonel Marcus Stone, the commanding officer of Fort Bowie and one of the most aggressive advocates for forced Apache relocation. Stone was known for his belief that the only solution to the Indian problem was complete subjugation and removal. Sam stood on his porch as the column approached, his hands visible and away from his weapons. He had no intention of giving Stone any excuse to use force, but he also wasn't going to show fear or submission. Sometimes, the only way to deal with a bully was to stand your ground and refuse to be intimidated. Colonel Stone dismounted with military precision and approached the porch with the bearing of a man accustomed to having his orders followed without question. He was a tall, imposing figure with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything they saw. "Mr. Morrison," Stone said in a clipped, authoritative voice. "I'm Colonel Stone, Fort Bowie. I believe you know why I'm here." "I'm afraid I don't, Colonel. Perhaps you could enlighten me." Stone's expression hardened. "Don't play games with me, Morrison. We tracked an Apache fugitive to your ranch last night. My men found clear signs that he was here for an extended period. We also found evidence of a large Apache war party that visited your property recently." Sam kept his expression neutral. "I run a cattle ranch, Colonel. I get all kinds of visitors, cowboys, traders, drifters looking for work. I don't keep detailed records of everyone who stops by." This particular visitor was Joseph Standing Bear, grandson of the war chief Nate. He's wanted in connection with several serious crimes, and there's evidence he's been using your ranch as a base of operations for reconnaissance activities. The accusation was so outrageous that Sam almost laughed. "Colonel, if you think I've been running some kind of spy ring out of my cattle ranch, you've been listening to too many tall tales. I'm just a rancher trying to make an honest living." But Stone wasn't finished. "We also have reports that you've been in direct contact with hostile Apache leaders, possibly negotiating unauthorized agreements or providing intelligence about military operations." "Hostile Apache leaders?" Sam repeated. "Colonel, the Apache wars ended with Geronimo's surrender. The tribes are at peace. Peace is a fragile thing, Mr. Morrison. It can be shattered by the wrong word in the wrong ear, or by well-meaning civilians who don't understand the delicate balance we've worked so hard to maintain." Stone began pacing back and forth in front of the porch, his hands clasped behind his back in the manner of an officer delivering a lecture to subordinates. "Let me explain the situation to you clearly. The Apache tribes in this region are being relocated to reservations in Florida for their own protection and the security of the territory. This relocation is not optional, and it will not be delayed by sentimental attachments or misguided alliances." The colonel's words confirmed Sam's worst suspicions. The federal government had decided to break the existing peace agreement and force all remaining Apache onto distant reservations, regardless of their compliance with current treaties. Any resistance would be crushed with overwhelming force. "Now," Stone continued, "you can cooperate with this process and avoid serious consequences for yourself, or you can continue to obstruct federal operations and face the full weight of military justice." Sam met the colonel's gaze steadily. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Provide a full account of your contacts with Apache individuals and leaders. Assist in locating the fugitive Joseph Standing Bear, and serve as a conduit for communications with Nate and other tribal leaders regarding the relocation process." The demand was clear. Stone wanted Sam to betray the people who had shown him friendship and trust. He was being asked to become an informant and collaborator in the destruction of the Apache way of life. "I'm afraid I can't help you with any of that, Colonel," Sam said quietly. Stone's face flushed with anger. "Perhaps you don't understand the seriousness of your situation. Morrison. You're suspected of harboring fugitives, interfering with federal operations, and possibly providing aid and comfort to hostile forces. These are serious charges that could result in the confiscation of your property and lengthy imprisonment. I understand perfectly, Colonel, but understanding something and agreeing with it are two different things. For a moment, Sam thought Stone might order his men to arrest him on the spot. The colonel's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, and several of the troopers shifted in their saddles, sensing the tension between their commander and the defiant rancher. But before the situation could escalate further, one of Stone's scouts came riding hard from the direction of the mountains. The man's face was pale with fear as he approached the colonel and whispered something urgent in his ear. Stone's expression changed dramatically as he listened to the scout's report. The anger was replaced by something that looked suspiciously like worry, and he glanced nervously toward the mountain peaks that rose in the distance. "We're returning to the fort immediately," Stone announced to his men. "Prepare to move out." As the column began to form up for departure, Stone turned back to Sam with a final warning. "This isn't over, Morrison. You have 24 hours to reconsider your position. After that, I won't be able to protect you from the consequences of your choices." Sam watched the soldiers ride away with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Something had clearly spooked Stone badly enough to abandon his interrogation, but Sam had no way of knowing what. The colonel's parting words suggested that even worse trouble was coming, and Sam would soon be forced to face it alone. As evening approached, Sam found himself pacing restlessly around his ranch, unable to shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The events of the past day had moved too quickly for him to process completely, and he had the nagging sense that there were forces at work beyond his understanding. It was just after sunset when Sam got his answer. A lone rider approached from the north, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who belonged in this landscape. As the figure drew closer, Sam recognized the distinctive silhouette of an Apache warrior, but this was not Joseph or anyone else he knew. The warrior was an older man, perhaps 40 years old, with the scarred hands and weathered face of someone who had seen many battles. He wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with practical elements adopted from white culture, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a proven leader. "Samuel Morrison," the man called out as he approached. "I'm called Miguel by the whites, though my true name is Chato. I bring word from Nate." Chato dismounted and approached the porch with the same formal bearing that Joseph had shown during their first meetings. Sam recognized the name. Chato was one of Nate's most trusted war leaders, a man whose reputation for both courage and wisdom was known throughout the Southwest. "Is Joseph safe?" Sam asked immediately. Chato nodded. "He reached our stronghold, though he was pursued closely by soldiers. Your plan worked well, but it has created new complications." "What kind of complications?" "Colonel Stone's pursuit led him closer to our hidden camps than any white man has come in many years. He saw things that were not meant for his eyes. Now he knows the true extent of our numbers and our preparations." Sam felt his stomach sink. "What preparations?" Chato's expression grew grim. "We have known for many months that the government plans to force our relocation. We have been preparing to resist, to disappear into the deep mountains where no army can follow us. But now Stone knows our plans, and he will act quickly to prevent our escape." The full scope of the disaster was beginning to dawn on Sam. By helping Joseph escape, he had inadvertently exposed the Apache resistance plans and accelerated the very conflict everyone had been trying to avoid. Stone's sudden departure from the ranch now made perfect sense. He had rushed back to Fort Bowie to organize a massive military operation against the Apache strongholds. "Nate sent me to bring you a message," Chato continued. "He says the debt between you has grown beyond what can ever be repaid. You have risked everything to help our people, and now you are in great danger because of our friendship." "What does he want me to do?" "He offers you a choice," Chato replied. "You can come with us into the mountains, where we will protect you as one of our own, or you can remain here and face whatever consequences the government brings. Either way, you will always have a place among the Chiricahua Apache." The offer was both touching and terrifying. Sam could disappear into the Apache strongholds and live as a fugitive for the rest of his life, or he could stay and face almost certain imprisonment or worse at the hands of federal authorities. Neither choice offered much hope for a normal future. "There's a third option," Sam said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. What if I could buy you time? Draw Stone's attention away from the mountains long enough for your people to escape to safety. Chato studied Sam's face intently. What do you have in mind? Stone wants me to serve as a go-between, to arrange communications with Nate about the relocation. What if I agree to help, but fed him false information? Led him to believe your people were somewhere they're not. It was a dangerous plan that could easily backfire, but it might be the only way to give the Apache the time they needed to disappear into the deep wilderness. Chato listened carefully as Sam outlined his idea, asking pointed questions about timing and logistics. This plan would require you to betray the trust Stone places in you, Chato warned. When he discovers the deception, his revenge will be terrible. I understand the risks, Sam replied. But if it gives your people a chance to escape, it's worth it. Chato was quiet for a long moment, studying Sam's face in the gathering darkness. Finally, he nodded slowly. I will carry your words to Nate. But I think I already know what his answer will be. What's that? He will say that you have proven yourself to be a true friend to the Apache people, and that Apache friends do not abandon each other in times of trouble. As Chato prepared to leave, he handed Sam a small leather pouch. This is from Joseph. He said you would understand its meaning. Sam opened the pouch and found a beautifully crafted silver medallion bearing Apache symbols. It was clearly a piece of considerable value and significance, the kind of gift given only to mark important relationships or occasions. Tell Joseph I'm honored, Sam said. And tell Nate that whatever happens, I won't regret the choices I've made. Chato mounted his horse and prepared to ride back into the darkness. You should know, he said as a parting message, that you have changed more than just your own life by helping our people. Stories of your kindness are being told around Apache fires throughout the territory. You have become a bridge between our peoples, a proof that friendship is possible even in times of great conflict. As Sam watched Chato disappear into the night, he realized that he was about to embark on the most dangerous chapter of his life. But he also felt a strange sense of peace about his decision. Sometimes, he reflected, a man had to choose between safety and honor, between comfort and conscience. The dawn would bring Colonel Stone back to his ranch, and with him would come the ultimate test of Sam's resolve and the bonds of friendship he had forged across cultural boundaries. Whatever the outcome, Sam knew he would face it with the knowledge that he had stood for something greater than his own interests. The desert night settled around him with its familiar sounds and smells, but everything felt different now. Sam Morrison was no longer just a simple rancher trying to make an honest living. He had become something he never expected to be, a man whose choices could affect the fate of an entire people, and who had decided that some things were worth any sacrifice. Colonel Stone returned to Sam's ranch at first light, just as Chato had predicted he would. But this time he came with only a small escort of trusted officers, leaving his main force at a distance. The colonel's demeanor had changed from the aggressive posturing of the previous day to something more calculating and businesslike. Sam recognized the shift and knew it meant Stone was ready to make a deal. I trust you've had time to reconsider your position, Mr. Morrison, Stone said as he dismounted near Sam's porch. The morning air was crisp and clear, with the promise of another scorching day ahead. I have indeed, Colonel, Sam replied, meeting Stone's gaze with careful neutrality. I believe we may be able to help each other after all. Stone's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. He had clearly expected more resistance, and was suspicious of Sam's sudden change of heart. I'm listening. You want information about Apache movements and leaders. I have some knowledge in that area, gained through trading relationships over the years. Sam paused, choosing his words carefully. But if I'm going to risk my reputation and possibly my life by providing such information, I need assurances about my own situation. What kind of assurances? Immunity from prosecution for any past activities, and protection from retaliation by Apache who might see me as a traitor. Sam had spent most of the night working out the details of his deception, and he knew he had to make his demands believable. Stone considered this for several moments. Sam could see the colonel weighing the value of the intelligence he might gain against the cost of protecting one civilian rancher. Finally, Stone nodded slowly. Those terms are acceptable, provided the information you provide proves valuable. But understand this clearly, Morrison. If you try to play me false, the consequences will be severe. I understand completely, Sam said. Shall we begin? Over the next 2 hours, Sam walked a delicate tightrope between truth and deception. He provided Stone with accurate information about Apache customs and traditional travel routes, mixed with carefully crafted lies about current locations and plans. He confirmed that Nate was indeed planning resistance to forced relocation, but claimed the war chief was gathering his forces in the Chiricahua Mountains far to the southeast, rather than in the Dragoons where they actually were. Stone listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions that tested Sam's knowledge and credibility. The colonel was no fool, and Sam had to be careful not to seem too eager or to provide information that was too convenient. The key to successful deception, Sam had learned from his years as a deputy, was to mix lies with enough truth to make the whole story believable. "You say Nate is moving his people toward the Mexican border," Stone said, studying a map spread out on Sam's kitchen table. "That would make sense if he's planning to disappear into the Sierra Madre Mountains. It's virtually impossible to track anyone in that wilderness." "That's what I've heard," Sam confirmed. "The plan is to move in small groups to avoid detection, then regroup once they're safely across the border." Stone made several marks on his map, noting the routes and locations Sam had indicated. "When is this movement supposed to take place?" "Within the next few days," Sam lied smoothly. "The longer they wait, the more likely it is that Army patrols will discover their preparations." The colonel folded his map with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Morrison, this information could prove invaluable in preventing a costly and unnecessary conflict. If we can intercept Nate's people before they disappear into Mexico, we can complete the relocation process without bloodshed." Sam nodded, though internally he was sickened by his role in the deception. "I'm glad I could help, Colonel. I have no desire to see violence between your people and the Apache." As Stone prepared to leave, he handed Sam a paper bearing official seals and signatures. "This document grants you immunity for any past activities and places you under federal protection. Keep it with you at all times." "Thank you, Colonel." "What happens now?" "Now we move quickly to intercept Nate's forces before they can escape," Stone said grimly. "I'm taking my regiment south within the hour. With luck, we'll have the situation resolved within a week." Sam watched the soldiers ride away with mixed feelings of relief and guilt. His deception had worked, but only time would tell whether it would give the Apache enough opportunity to escape to safety. He had bought them perhaps a week, maybe more if Stone had to spend time searching the wrong locations. But Sam knew his troubles were far from over. Even if his plan succeeded in helping the Apache escape, he would still be seen as a collaborator by his own people, and his relationship with federal authorities would remain precarious at best. Once Stone discovered the deception, Sam's life wouldn't be worth much. 3 days later, Sam received an unexpected visitor who brought both good news and ominous warnings. It was late afternoon when he noticed a lone rider approaching from the west, moving with the casual pace of someone on routine business. As the figure drew closer, Sam was surprised to recognize Maria Gonzalez, a Mexican-American trader who regularly traveled between the various settlements and tribal camps in the region. Maria was a remarkable woman who had carved out a unique niche for herself in the dangerous world of frontier commerce. She spoke several languages fluently, including Apache, and had earned the respect of both sides through her honesty and neutrality. Her trading post near the border served as an informal diplomatic center where different peoples could meet and conduct business safely. "Sam Morrison," she called out as she approached. "I bring greetings from mutual friends." Sam understood immediately that she was referring to the Apache, and that her visit was not coincidental. "Maria, it's good to see you. What brings you this way?" Maria dismounted and secured her horse before walking to the porch where Sam waited. She was a woman in her 40s with graying black hair and intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. Her practical clothing and well-worn gear marked her as someone who spent most of her life traveling rough country. "I have news from the mountains," she said without preamble. "Your friends want you to know that they are grateful for the time you have bought them. They are moving to safer places as we speak." Relief flooded through Sam at this confirmation that his deception was working. "And Joseph? Is he safe?" "Joseph Standing Bear is well and sends his personal thanks. But there are other matters that concern him and his grandfather." Maria's expression grew serious. "Word has reached them that Colonel Stone is not the only threat you face." "What do you mean?" Maria glanced around carefully before continuing. "There are men in Cedar Ridge asking questions about you, offering money for information about your activities and associations. Some of the townspeople have been talking to them. Sam felt his stomach clench with worry. What kind of men? The kind who work for people with money and power, but who prefer not to be seen doing their own dirty work, Maria replied grimly. I think someone wants you discredited or eliminated, and they're not particular about which. The implications were chilling. If powerful interests were moving against him independently of Stone's military operations, Sam might be facing enemies on multiple fronts. It was possible that mining companies or cattle barons who wanted Apache lands were taking their own measures to remove obstacles to their plans. There is more, Maria continued. Joseph's grandfather has sent a message. He says that if you're willing to accept it, he has a proposition that might solve many problems. What kind of proposition? Maria reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch similar to the one Chato had given him. Nate offers you a full partnership in a trading venture that would span both sides of the border. You would have the protection of both Apache and Mexican allies, as well as a legitimate business reason for your movements and associations. Sam considered this carefully. Such an arrangement would give him cover for his relationship with the Apache while providing economic opportunities that could make him too valuable to eliminate casually. It would also cement his ties to Nate's people in a way that would be difficult for his enemies to attack directly. What would be required of me? You would need to leave this ranch and establish operations closer to the border, where you could move freely between different territories, Maria explained. It would mean giving up the life you have built here, but it would also mean freedom from the forces that are gathering against you. It was a generous offer that would solve many of Sam's immediate problems, but it would also mean abandoning everything he had worked for over the past 20 years. The ranch represented not just his livelihood, but his memories of Martha and Johnny and the dreams they had shared. I need time to think about it, Sam said finally. Maria nodded understandingly. Of course, but do not take too long. The men asking questions in town are not patient types, and Colonel Stone will discover your deception soon enough. As if her words had been prophetic, the sound of approaching horses reached their ears. A large group of riders was coming from the direction of town, moving at a pace that suggested urgency rather than casual travel. Sam and Maria both recognized the potential danger immediately. The root cellar, Sam said quickly. Same hiding place I used for Joseph. But Maria shook her head. I'm a known trader with legitimate business here. Hiding would only make things worse. Instead, she quickly unsaddled her horse and began setting out trade goods on Sam's porch, creating the appearance of normal commercial activity. The approaching riders turned out to be Carson and his bounty hunters, but they were accompanied by several men Sam didn't recognize. The strangers wore expensive clothes and carried themselves with the arrogance of people accustomed to having their orders followed without question. Carson dismounted and approached the porch with his characteristic swagger, but Sam noticed that he kept glancing deferentially at one of the well-dressed strangers. It was clear that Carson was no longer in charge of this operation. Morrison, Carson called out. We need to have another talk. About what? Sam replied, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. One of the strangers stepped forward, a thin man with pale skin and calculating eyes. Mr. Morrison, my name is Aldrich Pemberton. I represent certain business interests that have concerns about your recent activities. Sam had heard the name before. Pemberton was a lawyer and businessman who represented several large mining and cattle companies. His presence here meant that corporate interests were now directly involved in whatever was happening. I run a cattle ranch, Mr. Pemberton. I can't imagine what business interests would find concerning about that. Pemberton smiled coldly. Come now, Mr. Morrison. We both know that's not entirely accurate. You've been involved in activities that could seriously complicate development plans for this region. What kind of development plans? The territorial government has approved several large-scale mining and ranching operations in this area, Pemberton explained. These projects represent significant investments and will bring prosperity to the entire region. However, they require that certain obstacles be removed. Sam began to understand the scope of what he was facing. Powerful corporate interests had apparently decided that his ranch and his relationship with the Apache represented threats to their expansion plans. They were moving to eliminate both obstacles simultaneously. What exactly are you proposing? Sam asked. A simple business transaction, Pemberton replied. You sell your ranch to my clients at a fair market price, and you relocate to some other area where your particular skills and relationships might be more appropriate. And if I refuse? Pemberton's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew colder. I'm sure that won't be necessary. After all, there are many advantages to cooperative arrangements and many disadvantages to uncooperative ones. The threat was clear, though politely delivered. Sam could accept their offer and abandon everything he had built, or he could refuse and face whatever consequences they chose to impose. Before Sam could respond, Maria stepped forward with the calm confidence of someone who had dealt with such situations before. Senor Pemberton, I believe you may be operating under some misconceptions about Senor Morrison's situation. Pemberton turned his attention to her with obvious annoyance. I don't believe this concerns you, Senora. Actually, it concerns me very much, Maria replied smoothly. You see, Senor Morrison and I have just concluded negotiations for a partnership that will make him a protected business associate of several influential families on both sides of the border. She reached into her saddlebag and withdrew an official-looking document with elaborate seals and ribbons. Sam had no idea where it had come from, but Maria presented it with such confidence that even Pemberton seemed taken aback. This partnership carries certain diplomatic protections, Maria continued, as well as the support of business interests that extend far beyond this territory. I'm sure your clients would not want to interfere with such arrangements. Pemberton examined the document with obvious frustration. Whether it was genuine or an elaborate fake, it was impressive enough to give him pause. Sam could see the calculation in the man's eyes as he weighed the risks of proceeding against an opponent with unknown but potentially powerful connections. This changes nothing, Pemberton said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Mr. Morrison's activities remain problematic regardless of his business associations. What activities are those? Maria asked innocently. Trading with Apache people is perfectly legal, and profitable partnerships with Mexican businesses are encouraged by both territorial and federal authorities. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Maria skillfully deflecting Pemberton's threats and accusations. Sam watched in amazement as she transformed what had seemed like a hopeless confrontation into a cautious standoff. Finally, Pemberton and his men departed with warnings about future developments and changing circumstances, but without taking any immediate action against Sam. As their horses disappeared into the distance, Sam turned to Maria with profound gratitude. That document, was it real? Maria smiled mysteriously. Real enough to serve its purpose. But it will not protect you for long. These men have resources and determination, and they will find ways to work around any obstacles we place in their path. So what do I do now? You accept nature's offer, Maria said firmly. It may be the only way to survive what is coming. As evening settled over the ranch, Sam found himself at a crossroads that would determine the course of the rest of his life. He could cling to his old life and probably face destruction, or he could embrace an uncertain future that might offer salvation at the cost of everything he had known. The decision, he realized, had probably been made the moment he chose to help a dying young Apache by the side of his fence. Everything that had followed was simply the logical consequence of that simple act of human kindness. Sometimes, Sam reflected as he watched the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The most important choices in a man's life were made not through careful planning, but through the spontaneous impulse to do what was right. And sometimes those choices led to destinations that could never have been imagined when the journey began. The final confrontation came sooner than Sam had expected, and from a direction he hadn't anticipated. 3 days after Pemberton's visit, Sam was awakened before dawn by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. But this time, the sound came from multiple directions at once, suggesting his ranch was being surrounded by a large force. Sam grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, where he could see at least 40 riders positioning themselves around his property. In the gray pre-dawn light, he could make out the blue uniforms of cavalry troops mixed with the civilian clothes of bounty hunters and hired guns. At the head of the force sat Colonel Stone, his face grim with barely controlled fury. As Sam watched, a white flag appeared among the riders, and a single horseman approached the house. It was one of Stone's lieutenants, a young officer whose nervous demeanor suggested he understood the gravity of the situation. Mr. Morrison, the lieutenant called out when he was within speaking distance. Colonel Stone requests your immediate surrender. You're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and providing aid to hostile forces. Sam stepped onto his porch, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. On what evidence, Lieutenant? The colonel discovered that the information you provided about Apache movements was deliberately false. When his forces reached the locations you specified, they found nothing but empty camps and cold trails. Sam had known this moment would come, but he had hoped for more time. Stone's discovery of the deception meant that whatever slim protection Sam had enjoyed as a federal informant had evaporated overnight. I provided the best information I had at the time, Sam called back. Apache movements are unpredictable. That's not how the colonel sees it, the lieutenant replied. He believes you intentionally misdirected federal forces to allow hostile Apache to escape. That's treason, Mr. Morrison. Before Sam could respond, another voice cut through the morning air from an unexpected direction.